In this video, we're talking about accompaniment patterns. Accompaniment patterns take the chord progressions that you've worked to craft and they add a little interest to them by adding some variation, and you'll see how that can make the pieces really interesting in just a second. So I'm going to walk you through several patterns that you might use as starting places for your songs. The list is not exhaustive. There's really no right or wrong. It just comes down to taste. And so at the end of the day, use your ear to come up with a pattern that works for you and for your song. What we're going to use is a chord progression, very simple, and I'll use it for all of the progressions or all the patterns so you can see how the pattern makes the chord progression different in each instance. So here's the pattern: C, E minor, A minor, and F. So in its very basic form, with the bass added, so the first thing you might do is a simple back and forth with a long, short, long rhythm, and this is how that goes. Something else you can do is vary the bass. You're going to notice I'm going to add some passing tones, and that's where between, for example, the C and the E minor chord, I'm going to add the D in, and then getting to the A chord from the E minor, I'm going to add a B on the way there, and you might see some other things on the way as well. So here's an example of that. This takes a little experimentation to figure out what works for you and what sounds good and what doesn't, but it's definitely a good way to make your piece sound really interesting by not adding a whole lot. You can also just add some rhythms in the bass. Just a lot of offbeats in there to give it some motion. Since in this instance you are the bass player, the keyboard player, and the drummer all wrapped into one. Something else you might do is arpeggios. Think Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. And there's a lot of variation you can do with that. You might try, you can try upside down arpeggios. You can do all sorts of things. You can go up an octave. So it's all the same notes. I'm just adding the B from the E minor chord on the top, and then for the A minor I'll do the C on top. So it's just the same chord, just extended up the octave. Something else you can do, very different, is repeated quarter notes. And maybe with pedal. And you can also add the walking bass like I did at the end there. Something else you might do is just a simple 1-3-5 arpeggio. Another variation would be rocking 5 and 3 with 1. And notice that any of these can be added you can add to these varying the bass. I didn't on that one, but you certainly could add some passing tones. Something else you might do is what I call just a freestyle, and this is where you take any notes in the chord and they're a really fair game. So as long as you're on the C chord, you can play a C, E, or G anywhere on the piano, and pretty much it'll sound good. Now, you can have some taste with it. You wouldn't probably do just random notes, but if you can connect them in a gesture, that's really helpful. So here's what that might look like. Now that might sound complicated, but really all I was doing was taking the notes of each chord and doing some arpeggios in the left hand. So that would look like C, G, and E. That's a particularly good sounding variation in the bass, is take that chord and then take the middle note and put it up the octave. So that's the E minor, take the middle, put it up. Here's A minor and F. And right there with some pedal, it sounds really great. Now we could take maybe our rocking pattern and put that on top of that. Or maybe some arpeggios. Or back to the idea of freestyling, you could even freestyle the right hand, and like we did some passing tones in the bass, you can add those in the right hand. It's still a little bit stilted with just keeping that pattern the same, so you might do it sometimes and maybe not to give it a little more free feeling. I just came up with another version that you might do in the left hand. So that's rocking up to the octave, one note above, and then up to the third. So there's infinite variations of what you can do here. The best way to figure out what you want to do is listen to your recording, decide sort of what you want it to sound like, if you want to do as close as possible to it, or if you want to make kind of a cover version and make it your own. Either way is fine, but make it your own. And it has to be just you, of course, because you don't have a band behind you. And then just start playing around. You have your progression down really well because you've been working up to that in the last couple of weeks with your inversions. And just sit down at the piano and see what happens. I hope this is helpful. Let me know if you have any questions.